Now we're coming to the third sign in the zodiac, where everything starts from Aries. And the third sign, because it is the third sign within the first season, and therefore its quality being mutual, it is Gemini. So on your index card, you might want to write as the headline, Gemini, Mercury, in brackets, Yang Mercury or Outer Mercury, and the third house. And as the subtitle, the element is air. It is mutable, and it is yang. And that's why we want to see Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, as from the yang side, from the outgoing side, which I would always recommend because we had Venus before. Venus' first sign is a yin sign. So basically, if we want to have like priorities, Venus' priority is more of a yin rulership in the first place, right? Because its first sign in the zodiac is Taurus. Whereas Mercury, the first sign in the zodiac, is a yang sign. So Mercury has more of a tendency to be nervous and outgoing than the yin sign of Mercury, which we'll learn later with Virgo. So Gemini, being the third sign, being the element of air, being yang and mutable. I just imagine air within itself is an element that is restless by itself. The mutable quality adds to that, and the yang adds even more to that. So we do have an archetype of restlessness. And as the air elements correlate with our mental activities or the mental body, and therefore also with everything that goes through and in our nervous system, we have a certain nervous restlessness. And as the element of air, like air in this room, is like constantly moving, and a yang air that is like outgoing is basically what I'm doing right now. My thoughts come out of my mouth in a yang way. So Gemini has everything to do with any form of communication. Primarily so with any form of intellectual, mental, or communication of thoughts. Not necessarily beliefs. We get to that when we come to Sagittarius. But of course, in order to express my beliefs, I do need language. So therefore, the archetype of Gemini is clearly language and languages. Because as we know, there are more languages than just one. On this plane of Mother Earth, in this universe of duality, there cannot be just one language, even though there is just one language, but that's the universal language. But Gemini, in its like restless and another archetype, interests, like not on the bank account, not that interest, but it's always interested, it's curious. So it's the curiosity about figuring out this endless diversity within the manifested creation, and all the little bits and pieces and this and this and da. So there's a restless need to kind of like explore in a mental and intellectual way the diversity of what there is or appears to be. And with its need to describe things, to have mental descriptions, Gemini, Mercury, and especially the third house in every individual chart, is also the necessity to give names and labels and descriptions to items in the manifested creation. So the table does not call itself table. The table just is. But we do have a need, due to our Gemini third house, to give that thing a name in order to be able to communicate to, for instance, say, look at the table. Because if I would just say, look at the thing, and then look at this thing, we would not know. So basically, the necessity to give things names and description adds to a necessity to create a mental, intellectual framework to describe and give names to that what we call the manifested creation. And therefore we do need words, labels, and behind that, of course, thoughts. So every thought activity has to do with the third house in an individual chart and with Gemini. And as it is yang, it is restless, immutable, it is the need to express it. So any form of expression, not so much of a Leonian expression, like Leo walks the room and is the center of the universe and radiates. That's expression too. But here we have to do with mental expression in a restless way. And that can be found in any form of communication, like newspaper, news, Twitter, even though the internet within itself correlates more so with Aquarius or the 11th house. Yeah? But all the information that are just like, bzz, 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 through the internet, that's truly Gemini, right? And sticking with the internet for a moment, the internet is full of opinions. So Gemini is the archetype of opinion because each of us has an opinion. Has the opinion if that table is beautiful or not, if it's like needed or not, if it should stand to the left side or to the right side. So it's all of our opinions. And as we live in duality, naturally, to one opinion, there's always an opposing opinion. Right? But within Gemini itself, and then our third house, naturally, because the symbol of Gemini, which looks like, like a Roman number 2, is the sign of duality. I'm not saying that Gemini is the duality, but it's the symbolism of duality. Basically, everything in the horoscope is duality, because we are born in a world, and the world is duality from that moment on where you take the first breath. Because when you have taken the first breath, you are separate. And you are under the law of duality, right? After inhalation, exhalation, inhalation, exhalation. And you do that for a couple of years. And then when the body is finished, you do an exhalation. So basically, between life and birth, we're just like duality, duality, duality. And because it is an air sign, Gemini does indeed correlate with our respiratory area and with our breathing. Inhalation, exhalation, inhalation, exhalation. What Gemini, now that comes like my Sagittarius, what Gemini forgets, that breathing is not only inhalation, exhalation, but between inhalation and exhalation and inhalation is a pause, is a nothingness, is a stillness. That means behind duality there's always the other, that always eternal, as I said in the beginning, that autos, that center, that does not move, that is eternal, that is complete stillness. But for Gemini, oh no. We all know the symbol of yin and yang, where we have the kind of like shape of a drop in black and the shape of the drop in white. So we usually see like two symbols. But in reality, it is just two opposite symbols within one symbol, the eternal circle. Right? So it's not about more yin or more yang. It is at one point in a spiritual awakening of that what I always was, like in the remembering, that there was never anything else but just an eternal circle within, or with an eternal circle where it appeared that a duality was taking place. So with that need for inhalation, exhalation, the respiratory area, the breathing, we have to also admit that all of our thought processes are directly linked with the quality of our breathing. When you are in a state of anxiety, your breathing is hectic, not as deep, quick, much quicker inhalation. And your thoughts will be even more restless. And vice versa. If you are in a very relaxed, peaceful, even blissful state, Your breathing will be very calm, very slow. So that's maybe, for Gemini, everything is interesting because it's the archetype of gathering information and spreading information. I hear an information, I have to spread information. Did you hear what happened yesterday? Did you hear da 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 da? Yeah. But what's really interesting is we can master our thoughts, but not by trying to suppress thoughts, as many people who start with meditation, they try to not have thoughts. I don't want to have thoughts. I don't want to have thoughts. Well, that does not work. You can master your thoughts via mastering your breath. When you have mastered your breathing, when you are the master of your inhalation, exhalation, I promise you, you will be master of your thoughts. And until then, you will be not the master over your life. You will be the slave of that restless nervous system that is constantly stimulated, especially in a modern world where we have an overload of information, commercial, billboards, news, bling bling, Twitter, those kind of things. We are constantly, like our nervous system is like overly stimulated. Yeah? So the result in our inner yin-yang balance, male-female, which we'll get to at Cancer, is out of balance. We are highly male stressed and fall for the error belief as faster as we get things done, the sooner I will have peace. And that's a big error, right? It's just the opposite. When I go like, you know what? I'm going to do that tomorrow or maybe the day after. And I just go, breathe, inhale, exhale, finding the center. Then you come to a balance and you will see your breathing rhythm will change, your thoughts will change. And if you practice that, you can even come to a point of complete thoughtlessness, which of course is not Gemini. But as Gemini is the air part of the mutable cross, remember the qualities like Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Through the axis of our breathing and thought processes, we can actually access the eternal consciousness of one, which is Pisces. But it's only doable via breathing technique. I mean, you can do other things. You can do chanting. But if I always go like, honey, 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 I'm still restless. Gemini is up to take as much information in as possible. And as is an air sign, immutable, it is about diverse information. It's not just one. It is just about everything, right? Like I have a good friend, he's truly Gemini, you know, he's most happy when he is like, the TV is on, like 2 of his computer screens are like giving him all the information about Wall Street and this, a fax is coming in, he gets like SMS and Twitter and all that, then he's completely at peace because it's this bzz, 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 bzz kind of thing. But nevertheless, going back to the very essential things, within ourselves we do have a nervous system. The nervous system requires information and stimulation. Because we do need to somehow mentally get a concept or have descriptions for us to think we come along in the world by names and descriptions. But without that, we are instantly at peace. But for Gemini, this is not important. Like if we would go like from the first house when the baby is born, the ascendant is the moment of birth, and the baby is born. So first there's the physical body, then there comes the second house, which is like Taurus. It is its needs. Like when the baby feels well, it feels well, like Taurian well. When there's something like that is lacking or it is not pleasant in a Venus way, it now needs to give sign. That's Gemini. Going back to that, I am born, I have my resources. Let's say I'm a farmer and I have like beautiful oranges. And now I need to somehow, sell those oranges of my resources for me to make money to be able to afford other things which I don't have. Then I, as the farmer, will drive to a market. And traditionally on a market, not our modern internet market, but like in Turkey, you have the bazaar. You have all these oranges. And now the people need to somehow express Like mentally express, my oranges are the biggest one. Take 5 and I give you a 6th one for free, and those kind of things. So everything that has to do with trade, merchandising, with communication of PR work, even though PR itself is Sagittarius, but the way how you, what letters you use, what color you use, how you market it, the whole marketing is a Gemini archetype. And a good marketing person tries to create, let's say, a PR clip in a way that many perspectives are covered. The intellectual need within ourselves to kind of like have a mental understanding and construction to be able to feel not as lost in this world makes Gemini within itself believe if it would know a lot of things, yeah, it would be wise or knowledgeable. But it's Gemini within itself, not Gemini like born Gemini people, but Gemini within itself does have a tendency, because of its restlessness, to take information in very superficially and to then broadcast them or pass them on like a mediator, yeah, like a mailman, right? Like a messenger. Like Mercury in the Greek philosophy was the god of communication. So he was usually like the mailman from Zeus or Jupiter. But he was also the god of the merchandises, like any form of trade, markets. He was the god of the shipmen, of the sailors, because, you know, like in ancient Rome and Greek, you know, they did like shipping from Egypt to Greek and all those kind of things. Therefore, Gemini has to do with all of our infrastructure that we do need in order to keep a market going, like streets, yeah? Morse codes between Europe and America when the first cable was placed between in the Atlantic. But the interesting thing is, Mercury is also the god of the thieves. Or as a Native American, he's the trickster, right? He loves to trick, yeah? And not in a vicious or bad way, but he loves to play with the mind. Not to use an F word with the mind, but he loves to use that, to do that. You know, like the photographer, you know, when they take a picture, they go like, look at the birdie, and your attention is instantly there, and, you know, picture is taken. So it's everything about tricking. By the way, there's a fabulous show, if you like those Gemini trickster things. The BBC produced a TV show a couple of years ago. It's called Hustle. It's like about a con artist gang on highest British level. I mean, just like master tailored suit, you know, perfectly filmed. And they kind of like do con arts on business people or politicians who are corrupt, to basically teach them a lesson. So if you really want to get into like Gemini tricksters on a high class thing, BBC level, you know, watch that show, Hustle. But anyway, the need to express things and to have an opinion and to exchange that opinion is in our current modern Western world a very apparently high good. All the talk shows, you know, all the information in the newspaper, it's always yin-yang, good and evil, yes, but, yes, but, yes, no, yes, yes, but, no. So in a typical Gemini mind, or in all of our third houses, there's like a ping pong. Yes, no, but. Yes, no, but. Yeah? Shall I drink milk? No, I shouldn't do dairy. Yeah, I should, but I would like to. No, you know, it's just a restlessness. Similar to when you look at a lake, you know, let's say up in the mountains, and it's a beautiful lake, and it's deep, it's pure, it's clear, totally peaceful. But the wind on the surface brings always like kind of new little crizzles and crizzles. Yeah? I know sometimes my English is more oolish, yeah? But that's like our mind. And often, if we have no deeper understanding of who we really are, we think that we are our mind, that Gemini mind. Or as I like to call it, it is also the ego mind. What I mean is like, the body needs, because it has a nervous system, the body does need, yeah, a communication tool. Yeah? And that's basically through our nervous system, through our communication. Right? But without my ego thoughts, what I mean like the body ego thoughts, there is another mind that we could call the higher mind. This is not a bad mind, but most people are basically attached to the ego mind. There's a nice thing about opinions in the Eastern philosophy, where in a very pitch dark cage, 3 men were led into this cage where there was an elephant in the cage. And one was led to the elephant's tail, the other one was led to the elephant's trunk, and the third one to the elephant's leg. And they were asked what they are perceiving. Well, because it was dark and there was no labels on it, they needed or used their hands. Gemini is the archetype of hands. And therefore, everything that we can do with the hands, handling things, grasping things, and I say that word before a new president was in office in a neighbor country. And like in the German language, to understand something, there's a word that means begreifen. But greifen means to touch something, to grasp something. So, when you are touching with your hand something, you start to understand what it is. Which very often for Gemini, and even more so for the other sign that Gemini rules, the Earth sign Virgo, is highly important, because Earth needs to be touched, right? Air is okay to think about, yeah? But because Mercury is the ruler of Earth and air, it is always a very good thing for learning and for understanding, for grasping something, to not only have thoughts about it, but to then practically touch, apply, and get a grasp of it. So back in this cage, these 3 men were asked what they are grasping, what their opinion was that they are seeing with their hands. And the one on the trunk said, oh, it's a hose. The one on the tail said, like, it's a whip. And the one on the leg said, it's a column. And they got into arguments because everyone thought his opinion would be right. Right? But, and that's something that Gemini in the 3rd house and us with our ego mind thinking need to always remember, that we only see a little particle or a little perspective of the truth. But very often, especially in our society, which promotes that you have to be, that you have to have opinion. You go into a job interview, you get the job if you have a certain strong opinion about certain things. If you go like, I realized everything is the same, you probably don't get the job. So it shows like what our society, what kind of values we have. So it goes along with being opinionated, right? And simultaneously, it is also the marketplace of diversity of opinions. Yeah, like the orange market, it's the marketplace of diversity of opinions. Where we have internet forums, where people can exchange, like the whole social media is nothing else than a Gemini place where everyone needs to drop their oh so important opinion and thinking it is true. Right? It's subjectively true because from the 1st house to the end of the 5th house, the born baby or person is building up her subjective personality. The 2nd house is my needs, my resources. The 1st house is my body, and the 3rd house is my opinion, my thoughts. That's legitimate. But we are at sign number 3. We're not at sign number 12 yet. So, be humble. So what Gemini also has to do is, so it's the exchange of opinion. And Gemini is very open, usually, naturally, because of its like dual, airy, mutable nature. It is very open to have a discussion or a talk and to, discuss the opinion of another person. But it's more about the joy of like playing ping pong. It's not necessarily about the depth of information. I sometimes have the tendency to say that Gemini within itself, if it would be just one person with no planets anywhere else, if everything would be in Gemini in the third house, Gemini would go into a bookshop and would like grab this book, and just read like, you know, the short like description on the back, and would have like 15 books, would leave the bookshop and have the feeling, oh, today I read 15 books. Yeah? It's just this like quick thing. And that's nice, you know, because it's in a certain way, it's light, it's very casual. Yeah? It is not stiff, you know, it is like easy peasy breezy kind of thing, which is good. So all places where you either have the exchange of opinion or places where there's exchange of knowledge, schools for instance, yeah? Or any kind of other places in the meantime, like social medias and those kind of things, are basically like Gemini. Like good old Europe, you know, has a pub culture, right? Think of Great Britain, right? You would go to the pub, right? And at the pub you have a drink, you have a chit-chat. Yeah? Chit-chat is very, very Gemini, chit-chat, right? And you share your opinion, you talk things off your chest, which gives you more room for your respiratory area to breathe again, if you had trouble with your boss or whatever, right? So any kind of place where people meet in a superficial way, in the US that would be more like the bar, right? Because there's no, it's not really a pub culture. In Vienna and southern Germany, it would more the coffee house, like, you know, in the days before there was a Starbucks. The real coffee house, you know, like in Vienna, you know, after the Turks were like defeated and not like occupied Europe and Vienna, they left the Turkish coffee culture in Vienna. So if you go to Vienna, they still maintain, because Austrians are really deeply rooted in their traditions, you go to an Austrian coffee house and it has this heavy carpet, you know, this heavy curtains, you know, this old kind of furniture. It smells like, you know, a couple of like decades, if not to say centuries, but in a nice way, like somehow a hush of cigar, yeah? Somehow the coffee. And you have like men sitting there and they read the newspaper and they have a little conversation. Yeah, that's this kind of atmosphere. That's very Gemini. Yeah, right. In the modern time, it would be more like, you know, let's say New York. You know, in New York, you usually have like a Starbucks on this corner, on the southeast corner, and on the northwest corner, and probably another one, right? And you would have the people on there, but it's still the same energy. They go to Starbucks to kind of like superficially socialize. So that's basically like what Gemini holds or what Gemini offers. And on a very practical level, especially if you get into family dynamics, Gemini has also to do with siblings, yeah? The siblings, and with neighbors. Gemini rules the left brain hemisphere. So with everything said, we can basically state that if we examine someone's third house in an individual chart, we're able to determine how the person is able to take in information, especially information from a left brain emphasized school and teaching system as we have in the Western world, and in the meantime in the Eastern world too, in the modern Eastern world. Like the Chinese school system is torture. Yeah. And this school system, this left brain school system is based more or less like on the German influence under like the Emperor Friedrich the Great, yeah, very strict Prussia, and the British Empire. So it is forcing the people in a dysfunctional patriarchal way to learn what is dictated that is important, but not to pick up the talents of the kids and to support them, right? So if you, for instance, have like a child and it has problems in our school system, before it is like labeled as being ADD and getting medication, you might want to look at the third house or consult an astrologer. Because a good astrologer will tell you how this child is naturally equipped to take in the information, process the information, and broadcast information. Let's say someone would have, which we have not learned yet, but Jupiter and or the Sagittarius, because Sagittarius being opposite of Gemini, therefore Sagittarius rules the right brain hemisphere. The I know that I know without knowing that I know. I don't need to add up, I just know the result, right? But you get an F grade because you knew the result, but you could not prove how you got there, so you must have been cheating, right? And then you're like, restless and that, you get all these labels. So if someone has like a strong right brain hemisphere in the chart, that can be Sagittarius on the third house cusp, which is very often when people have like a Libra rising. That can be when the ruler of the third house is in the ninth house or in any way tied in with Jupiter. Then they have probably more so a right brain hemisphere. That means they do not learn the linear way of the left brain. Step one, step two, step three. One apple and one apple and one apple must be 3 apple. They just look at the 3 apple and go like, it's 3 apple, I don't need to count. So that's the difference. These kind of like kids, they basically learn if the teacher tells them first what the purpose is, what the higher purpose is, why they should learn it, right? So if there's, for instance, geometry, and the teacher would start, in the old days, the old Greek philosophers, they were sitting on the cliff in Greek, looking at the stars at night, and we're like, this is pretty big. Why don't we try to make some forms and figure out? And because the year has like something about 360 days, let's just say this would be 360 degrees. Let's just call it degrees. And now we put this and this and this, then we have a triangle. And that would be like 120. The child with a right brain hemisphere would understand it immediately. But if there would be a teacher say, okay, the circle has 360 degrees, the right brain emphasized child would wonder, what, Fahrenheit or Celsius? And that moment it would stop because it would not be able to understand, what does the teacher, why should I learn that? There's no higher meaning. So it's basically that every child is equipped with beautiful, beautiful abilities. It's just that our school system is extremely narrow-minded from a time that we should, that we actually should have overcome. So if you want to see how you learn, if you have Virgo on the third house cusp, yes, you get the information, third house, but you then need to have practical experience. You need an outline, which we'll learn with Virgo. You need an outline, step one, step two, Like if you buy a vacuum cleaner, you would not start vacuum cleaning as long as you have not read the instruction. If you're lucky, in your language. Like if you buy in Europe, you'd have like all the languages that you've never heard of. But anyway, so that's basically Gemini.
Free your mind.
Remember times without time.
Free